Everyone, I just want to make a quick intro to Ed. He has been with us at WANDR. He's like OG, I think, since our first year, all the way up to last year as our former head of strategy. And so Ed was in the leadership team working with me in the trenches for quite some time and really helped build the foundation of the WANDR team and our Wanderito culture. So I'm super excited to have him present our Lunch and Learn special guest. He's currently working at Rebank as their lead designer. So today he's giving us some of his time to teach us about designing specifically for fintech. So thank you so much, Ed, for joining us. And I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today and to have the opportunity to talk to all the Wanderitos. It's always nice. Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about designing for fintech. Even when I was at WANDR, I was involved in some fintech projects with some other Wanderitos. And I've been very interested. After WANDR, I did a couple of fintech projects as well for some companies in Switzerland. And I've also been working with a fintech company based in the UK for some time. So yeah, I'm very passionate about it. I think it's super exciting. I think it's one of the fastest growing sort of like areas in technology in general. And yeah, I think it's super, super exciting. I hope you learned something. But basically today is about sharing what I have learned by working with these companies and these businesses and what I understand about the industry, which is not too much, but hopefully is going to be helpful. So let's start talking about why fintech and why fintech has been so sort of like revolutionary and has caused so much splash. Traditional banks, the banks that everyone knows, the banks that your parents have accounts with, basically they have the wrong incentives. The way they operate or the way they inspire trust or the way they attract more business and grow is through three things. One is their physical presence. So the bank has to be operating in the city you're in for it to make sense to have an account there. The other thing is the tradition. So people see these banks as institutions that have 100 or 150, 180 years of existence, and then automatically assume that they are safe, trustworthy, and then safe enough for you to put all your money in them. And the last one is they're regarded as safe vaults, which, you know, if you watch a lot of movies, you know that they're not that safe. And just the fact that before they used to have a lot of gold, now they have a lot of cash as well. But because they have physical goods that are valuable, they are very attractive for criminals. So this is like the old paradigm. This is the non-tech fin. This is the financial services industry before technological disruption. Now enter fintech banking. And I want to make it clear that fintech is a very big sort of subject. You can have financial technology apply to a lot of different aspects. But I want to focus in banking because probably is the one that's closest to all of us and also is the one that I have a bit more experience with. Having said that, the difference between fintech banking and the old banks, the very old guys, is you have a lot more control. You have control over your data and you have control over your money and what you do with it, what you decide to do with your data and your money, which didn't happen before with old banks. You have a great experience that if you ever had to deal with an old bank, with a traditional bank, you know that they're notorious for a shitty experience where everything is based on paper. You have to go to the office to do a lot of stuff, or you have to be on the phone for an hour to get anything sorted out. And the other one is transparency. So one thing that financial or like fintech companies are really trying to focus on is the transparency in data, how data is stored, managed, and processed, and giving you access to how that data to basically do, you know, whatever you want to do with it. So let's start with control, which is one of like the strengths that fintech banking has over the old guys. So basically we start from a user that says, I want to have control over my data. I want to be able to use the data because it's my data. Seems like not only when we're talking about money, but when we're talking about everything online. So I want to be able to download my data. And usually most of the data that's in your account is in the form of a statement or a bunch of transactions. So as a user, it's important that I have control over what all of the movements that my account has had, or my accounts if I have multiple accounts. So I should be able to download my information. I should be able to export that information to other apps. One of the cool things, one of the very useful things about fintech and fintech banking is that you can use your data with other third-party applications. So like you can export your transactions, you can use APIs without getting too technical, webhooks to connect to different applications and like get reports and use like a lot of algorithms that will make sense of how you're spending your money. Which is super, super cool. And you're not able to do it if, your statements are just like this monolithic PDF that you download. I want to be able to manage my accounts easily and by myself without having to go to an office or call anybody. So to open an account, to close an account, to block a card, to order a replacement card if it's stolen or whatever, I want to be able to do all of that by myself without having to talk to people or like having to go through a very long and boring process. And share account details. So when we're talking about working with other people, business to business, and when we're talking, even business to consumer or consumer to consumer, when you're talking between two people to like human beings, I want to be able to share my details so that people can pay me. Or even easier than that, look people up with their phone number or with their email address that's associated to that account and make it like that very easy for people to send money to each other without having to enter a huge account number and the BIC code or like the BIC code or the other codes that banks use as some international identifiers. So one example of this is Revolut. This is it's the biggest fintech company in the UK and one of the biggest in the world. They have the option for you to use your data and sync it with your accounting software. So that allows you to bring the information that you already have from your accounting tool, whether that's QuickBooks or whatever you use, Xero and the others, and do stuff with that data. So it's a two-way sync. And that's super cool and super helpful for people managing finances in the company, or even for consumers that just want to have access to the possibility of those two apps or services connected and communicate to each other. The other one is having control over my money. So I don't have to explain to you guys that work with WANDR that all businesses nowadays are international. It's not weird or it's not odd or it's not uncommon to see companies nowadays having international clients or having international employees or, exporting services and exporting goods. So a lot of companies need to have the flexibility of send money internationally and even receive money internationally. So like, let's say if WANDR has a client outside the US in Canada or in Europe or in South America, that flexibility to send and receive money between parties in different countries is something that tends to be very, very expensive. If you use the traditional banking system, the fees are huge and it's very slow and the experience is awful. And part of that is because banks have the wrong incentives. So banks make money by charging you for every single thing that you do. So if you send money, they charge you a fee. If you open an account, they'll charge you, a monthly fee just for having it open. If you get paid, you have to pay money. And probably the person that sent you the money also got charged by their banks. So there's fees everywhere, and their fees are very high. So one of the things that fintech has is that they're not, or at least fintech banking, their incentive is not on charging you fees. The majority of the revenue comes from subscriptions and users. So the more people that use their services, the more revenue, the more money they make. So they don't have to charge you for every single thing, every single transaction. Well, abroad. So same thing. If you're like working abroad, if you're going on a business trip, or if you're just traveling, you're just like a regular person going out and about, and like you want to pay for stuff with your account, I shouldn't get charged massive fees just for like paying in a foreign currency when I'm traveling, which is what happens usually. Same thing with weekends. There's the concept of, you probably heard it, of banking holiday, which is basically what it sounds like. It's like banks don't open or work during those days. And then if you need to send a payment or receive your money or whatever, you need to do something over the weekend, or you need to do something in a bank holiday that's not always on the weekends, you're going to have to wait. So if Usually the transaction is supposed to take 4 or 5 days. And on top of that, there's a bank holiday. It's going to take even one extra day or even more if there's a weekend. When you think about it, there's really no need for that amount of weight, because money is nothing but numbers in a database. And I remember having this conversation with Ginny a while back. But like, really, that's really what it is. Money is just numbers in a database. It used to be gold. It's not gold anymore. It used to be paper. It's not paper anymore. It's just numbers. It's just bits. So when you think about it, there is no reason for transactions to be interrupted when humans are not working, because the processing of that data is mostly automatic. So it's computers approving payments and computers approving transactions and making changes to the database, which is, the same that you do every time you do something with a mobile app. You send a request to the server and the server processes the data and whatever. So there shouldn't be a reason for you not to be able to do instant transactions as money becomes more and more digitized. And in any currency, same thing. If all currencies are just numbers, then why do I have to pay huge fees to exchange money or to pay in a different currency? It makes no sense. It's just machines processing stuff. Unless, you're doing something illegal, in which case machines also can detect most of it and then raise flags and then freeze the transaction until, a human intervenes and looks at the information. So another example I have is from Brex. Brex is providing business banking for businesses, mostly in the US. They're a Y Combinator alumni. And they say very clearly in their website that banks impose these massive fees for transacting abroad for no reason, just because they can and they want, and that's how they make money. But there's really no reason for them to do that. And as soon as you realize that, you start wondering, okay, why am I getting charged for every single thing that I do with my bank? Like, if they charge me every time I do this internationally, what else are they charging me for? Well, then, and you start making the list of overdraft fees and, all of the things that banks are famous for. I like Brex's website because it's very business international oriented. They understand that businesses are operating internationally. And the last one, which is the one that's probably the most familiar to you guys, is the great experience, which is something that you do not get with the old banks. It's not a great experience to be on the phone for 1 hour to get a transaction unfrozen or, fix something with your account or close your account. Those things don't need to happen that way. The reason they happen that way is because, maybe your old traditional bank has like a nice little app that looks cool and looks modern, but that's just a facade. That's a digital layer that sits on top on like legacy systems that are still paper-based. So even if you see, your bank using a very nice interface or mobile app, in the backend, things are still very slow. Things are still the way they used to be years ago. They haven't changed because they're too big. It's too difficult for them to change. As designers, what we can do to improve the experience and to collaborate or to be part of this sort of transformation of the banking industry is to design for the perception of speed. Not necessarily designing for speed, because there's still going to be some wait times associated to some stuff, but at least the perception of speed. And, we can do that through animations and, things that using the user interface to provide feedback very quickly. Once you understand the process of how a payment is processed, all of the flows that go into an app, you understand that at all the layers. So the back end, the front end, the business side of things, and the customer side of things, you can start using design thinking to go around certain things that don't really need to happen. And then you can improve the speed of not only transactions, but all the operations that you do with your bank. So snappy animations, that's super cool. That's, always a good experience. And reassuring confirmations. We're designing interfaces that deal with people's money. And that's, something that if we mess it up, people get very upset. So all the time reassuring them of that their money's safe, that the transaction, if it didn't go through, it will come back to their account, that the information that they sent was well received. Always providing confirmations, which is not only just for fintech, just is good design practice in general, just letting the user know what's happening and not making them nervous about oh, I did something, I don't know what happened. I like this example. This is an old screenshot because they've rebranded since then. but wise.com, I don't know if you guys have used it. When you send money, it has this really cool animation in which you have like the recipient and the sender. And then there's the money that comes out of the recipient and then goes to Wise, which is the middleman. And then they process the transaction and then they send it to the sender. It's so cool to watch. I honestly don't know if like the animation is just sort of like a video that just plays, or if it's actually tied to something that's happening in the background. But I really don't care, because it's very reassuring to see how they're processing stuff and how like my money is moving around the world. So that kind of things, those things provide delightful experiences, and they're very reassuring for the user, feeling like, okay, my money is on its way. Wise has it. If something happens, they'll refund me or whatever. And also they do these little calculations of like how long does it take for them to process the money. And if you've used it, they started doing something as now that when you send money, they send you a notification on your app that will say, we expected that to take 4 hours or something. Did we get that right? So they ask you to confirm. And then what they're doing there is like, not everyone's going to respond, but it's kind of like what Google Maps does with how crowded is this train or how crowded this bus is, which is they use user-generated data to sort of like improve their models of like predicting how fast things are going to move. And that improves the sort of like the feedback that they can give the users, the more data they get from other users using the app. The other thing is clear terms without financial jargon. So in financial services, in the financial industry in general, there's so much jargon, just like a bunch of words that people don't understand and don't need to understand to use these services. And banks love to do that because, when they confuse people, they'll complain less perhaps, and they can charge them more stuff that they don't understand. But, they just assume that that's just the way things are. So another thing that fintech has is that transparency with their users. And that comes from the user experience and getting rid of all the jargon, just explaining things in plain terms. So when you send money, I don't want to bore you guys with this, but like depending on in which country you are and which country your recipient is, and the two currencies that you're exchanging, the combination of those like two variables can determine how your money gets processed. It's something called like payment rails. So there's so many. Well, there's so many. There's a bunch of them, but there's different ways or different sort of protocols or networks that people can that institutions use to send money. Ask me if I care which one did you use. I couldn't care less about how you send it. All I care is that you didn't charge me too much and that it arrives on time or it arrives quickly. I bring up the jargon thing and then I bring this video because I don't know if you guys have seen Johnny Harris. He has an amazing YouTube channel. And this video, I really liked it because he explains in the same video two concepts that for most people, it just like goes over their heads, which is blockchain and NFTs. It's a buzzword like blockchain. Everyone has heard blockchain and NFTs, but like a lot of people just don't know what these things are. And this video does an amazing job at explaining what those two things are in very simple terms in less than 20 minutes, which is something that is remarkable. And it's something he has a great talent for that. That's why I recommend this channel. But as a designer, to sort of like train that skill of explaining complicated things in simple terms, that will help you a lot to finding ways to communicate things to your users. Yeah, I really recommend you watch it. It's really, really cool. Also, his channel is awesome in general. So the last one, or sort of like the last sort of like strength of fintech versus all banks, is the transparency that I was talking about before. So providing clear, actionable feedback instead of like, maybe those of you who, are as old as me or older will remember, these random ass warnings that Windows used to. I don't know if they still do that, but this is just an example. It's not just Windows. It's like systems all over the world where it's almost like they're punishing users by giving them something that makes them nervous and not explaining why. Unknown hard error, like there's something super scary. It has like red and it has like a X there. So it's something that's really, really scary. It's upsetting for the user. And the worst part is the anxiety that comes with it because you don't know what to do in order to solve it or to fix it. Like chances are, if you get this message, and you still want to do whatever you were trying to do, you're going to try again to do the exact same thing and you're going to get the exact same error. So it's borderline cruel not to tell the user why things didn't go the way they expected. So it's something to think about, and it's something that, it's another sort of like difference between fintech and old banks. Old banks might, there's an error, they're not going to tell you. They charge you money and they're not going to tell you, or you don't know why, or they put random charges in your statement and they don't tell you why. Just don't do that. So yeah, some examples that I dropped here. So payment rejections, when your payment doesn't go through and you have no idea why. Like direct debits, like you get charged for random stuff and you have no idea why. Or like, companies that have really like their name is like their commercial name is like, I don't know, Happy Industries, and then the way they are registered as as a company is something like Dark Processing Society or something or whatever. I don't know. I'm coming up with like ridiculous terms, but it's just to say when you see your statement, you see something that you have no idea where it came from, and it has some obscure name, and you have no way of even starting a dispute for that charge, because you don't even know where that charge came from. So you can't even complain. When you go to your bank and try to say, I have no idea where this charge came from. Can you guys help me? They're going to be like, oh yeah, it's something that you purchased. It's like, yeah, but I don't remember buying this. And they're not going to tell you any more information. So those things are also something that you can keep in mind. Yeah, when scheduled payments don't go through and they don't tell you that it's because you didn't have enough balance or whatever. And the example of whys of how much is this going to cost, always tell the user how much it's going to cost, and you'll reduce a lot of the anxiety in like using technology for their payments and services. This is like sort of like if you're not familiar with whys, I want to show you like how they break it down and make it super, super transparent for you to know what's going on. So when you go on their website and you want to send money to anyone, the first thing, well, you have the two currencies, of course. And you doesn't matter where you type. You can type on the top one or in the bottom one, and it will convert the other one. So the cool thing is that you can decide which sort of like method for transferring is the best for you. So, more expensive is usually faster, not always. And there's like a huge difference. If you do just bank debit is, a small fee compared to a credit card, which is many times more. So you can choose that depending on how fast you want it and how much are you willing to pay for that transaction. So there's the network fee, or basically you choose from the drop down how you want to send it. That, let's just call it network fee. That's not the name, but just for the sake of simplicity. Then they tell you what's their fee or what they charge for running the entire operation, for like processing the thing. Then they tell you like out of that, what, like once you discount those fees, what's the actual amount that they're going to process and send. This is how much they're going to send. I thought it was really well thought out and really, really amazing, because not only all of these things are super clear and make sense for the user, but also they happen in real time. And it's not really that difficult to do. When the page loads, they load the current exchange rate just one time, and then everything else is calculated on your browser. They just have to load one thing when you select the currency pair, and then they do the calculation for you, which is something browsers do very easily. It's just a matter of thinking about the experience and then what can be done if you think about what are the anxiety points of the experience. So yeah, those are the three things: the control over my data and my money, providing a great experience, and being transparent about what's going on. And that's it. Thank you.
I was just curious, like, so you mentioned NFT and blockchain. Like, what kind of startups are you seeing around right now for NFT versus blockchain? Because you mentioned Wise and Brex and Revolut, but I was just curious.
Yeah, it's still very new, and there's a lot of people that feel like it's overhyped and it's just a bubble waiting to burst. So I don't know if a lot of people are sort of like investing or like putting their money on NFTs. I know there's, I think there's one called Blue Whale or White Whale, something like that. It's like a marketplace for NFTs where like you make an NFT and you upload it and then you charge something. I think all NFTs they work, or like they're based on the Ethereum blockchain. So yeah, so all NFTs are basically tied to a cryptocurrency. And then, there's a lot of startups and there's a lot of companies based on the Ethereum blockchain that do all of different things with that. Other than that one, the whale, which I don't remember the name correctly, I don't know of any more companies doing NFTs, but there's definitely a few.
Hey, Ed, this is Luis. One thing that I was wondering about is, do you see any of the larger institutions shifting over to the fintech more and more? And then the second part to that, what other industries are maybe learning from or can be applied with what's happening in fintech? And specifically, I come from out of the government side. So fintech is something that, the government, I think, is paying attention, the US government's paying attention to as a way to understand maybe even payments, getting money faster to tech companies or capability providers like small companies.
The problem with traditional incumbent banks is that they are huge institutions with thousands and thousands of employees, and they have very old processes. So for them to adopt technology, it's very difficult and costs a lot of money. And also a lot of these processes are based on specific skill sets of people that's what they do. So for example, credit analyst, risk analyst, people who make the bank make decisions, those kinds of functions are being taken over by machine learning more and more. So it's being automated. So all banks, for them to do that, they would have to fire a lot of people and then sort of build this new system from scratch. Yes, they're compatible in the sense that you can have some experts in credit analysts that will tell engineers how to code the model to analyze whatever. But that's, you need way less than the amount of people with that skill set that banks usually employ. So that would require a massive shift. And, banks, especially after, Occupy Wall Street and all that, they are not in the best position in front of in terms of public opinion and what people think, how people regard banks. So that would be a very difficult move to do for a very big bank. Basically, what I've seen they're doing is this thing of we're interposing or sort of applying a layer of technology. It kind of looks like they're modern, but in the back, they're still doing the same thing because it's so difficult. They're doing that because they're starting to notice that younger generations are coming into the workforce and starting to generate wealth, and they want more agile banking services. So they care more about the experience. So if they have to choose between an old bank where opening an account requires you to go to the office and, Brex or Revolut, where you can do everything online, they're going to go with online because they care about time. They care about not having to move and efficiency, especially, startups. If you're going to spend a whole day in the bank, or you can open your bank account, in minutes. There's a huge difference there. It used to be oh yeah, young millennials, they don't represent a lot of wealth. They're still young, but millennials are getting older and starting to make more money and have companies and businesses. They're generating a lot of wealth to the point that now they're a very interesting market. And now they're reacting to that. It's okay, millennials, they want a more polished experience and they want more agile processes. So now they're sort of playing catch up with what they call the challenger, which are all of the neobanks, not only Revolut and Brex, but there's dozens in different countries. So that's what I see sort of all banks doing. And the other one was something about the government and how they can sort of fund startups and technology.
Yeah, institutions like the government that can learn from what's happening, what's going on with financial tech, and maybe some of those tools that translate over.
Yeah, so governments play a big role in how much fintech companies can do because of the regulation. They need to be regulated. So it's not they can just start storing money and stuff. For you to provide credits and investment and stuff, you have to apply for banking licenses. So you have to collaborate. And also the government has to decide what you can and cannot do depending on the type of license that you have. So I think governments are getting up to speed and starting to regulate all of these services, which is a really good thing because all it does is foster the growth of more companies that want to improve the way banking works. Not only banking, but financial services. So yeah, that's in terms of government. Other institutions learning from fintech, I actually think is the other way around. I feel fintech is learning from other industries that already are pretty advanced. probably you've seen it working at WANDR, that there's so many companies that have already shifted to digital. Sort of like fintech gets people attention because it's money, but there's a lot of things in terms of mobile app and mobile experiences and, web experiences that they're just starting to adopt that have existed in other industries for a long time. So yeah, that's how I see institutions sort of like interacting with what fintech is doing.
Ed, I had a question about the approach that you would take when designing for something new, right? So I've had calls with people who say, I'm creating a marketplace that will use blockchain validation in the background and so on. Whether it's for that or for, let's say, an actual bank that is going to start conducting some crypto transactions or whatever it is, how would you approach designing for fintech as a new product, right? So if someone comes up with an idea to implement blockchain as a banking service or whatever, they come to us, they say, hey, I need you guys to create the UI UX. We can say, okay, perfect. This is how we're going to do it. What will be your approach there? And I'm asking more towards what kind of user research would need to be conducted and what is the approach to create something new within a field like this, within fintech?
Yeah, the first thing I would do is to not frame your entire communication strategy and around the technology. So don't make it about the technology, because people really don't care about your blockchain and like how you verify stuff. I would make it more about what you're accomplishing with that technology. It's just an example. Instead of like using blockchain to validate whatever, find another way to explain it. And now that takes me to the second point that you brought up, which is user research. Find out what your target audience needs and what's the language that they use to refer to those things, and then use that to explain whatever that you're doing. And also something that's very important is like, don't start with the technology and go to the user, start with the user and then create the technology. Or maybe it's an existing technology, but you're solving a new problem. And then this is a new application of that technology. That's also valid. I've seen a lot of companies that just go and think that people are going to buy their products and use their software just because they use blockchain. Like, people really don't care about those things. Only a very small segment of the population who are actually into crypto and blockchain and understand those concepts. And unless you're targeting those people, you're not going to get a lot of traction.
Awesome. So on that point of, start with the user, right? I've heard you talk before about quantitative and qualitative data. So how would that data be collected? Because if it's going to be a service for everyone, right? And let's say we've got a problem topology or whatever it is that's going to determine that user need. How do we get to those user needs, particularly in fintech, right? How do we understand quantitatively and qualitatively what the user wants?
It really depends on the type of validation or information that you're seeking to obtain. So you need to have a very clear idea of who is going to use the thing, or like what is the problem that you're solving and who can find that solution valuable. So when you're starting out, of course, doing a lot of, research, like reading and seeing what other people have done, but also talking to people and trying to understand how they do things and what's the current, or like in jobs to be done, it would be like, what's the current solution or the workaround for that solution that you're trying to create. And then once you have some prototypes, once you have some ideas, when you actually want to make validation or do validation and make sure that you're going in the right direction, then you can do a combination of quantitative and qualitative. Now, the thing with qualitative is it's very difficult to scale. And depending on the type of product and depending on the type of market, it can be very difficult to find people who are willing to give you their time. It's not always that case, but it really depends on what you're working with. But yeah, later on, you can start using qualitative because qualitative scales very well. You can just set up a bunch of conversion goals in your app or in your web app or your product, and like infer depending on certain behaviors. If there's a specific behavior that you cannot explain, then you can go and talk to users and get feedback on like what's going on based on the data. That's sort of like the progression that I see in terms of like, if you're starting from scratch, I would like talk to a lot of users. It's a lot of qualitative feedback. And as you grow as a business and as a company, you start relying more and more on quantitative data.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about this a little bit more. So it seems like the opportunity might come through fintech that have a focus on connecting to the primary tool of a bank. So like Wise, Brex, Revolut, there are all these tools that are like doing things with the data because it's available now. There might be a high probability that we would encounter a startup that is doing the same kind of thing in a different way. Have you seen any common challenges for those types of startups to adopt? Like from an owner's perspective, what are the challenges that they're facing?
The challenges to gain market share?
Yeah, like I'm an owner of Wise or Brex or Revolut, and like they come to us for the first time and they're like, hey, like help us build this thing. And they have this challenge that they need to get through to get their first or second round of funding or whatever. What are those common challenges that they're facing, and what have you seen?
Yeah, I think messaging is one of the biggest challenges. The market is huge. The financial services market is massive around the world. And then I see two types of sort of players. I see the big ones, the behemoths that want to be a super app and want to build everything from scratch and be everything for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I see the very specialized niche startups and companies that are trying to solve a very specific problem. I would put Brex and Revolut on the category of like the big companies that are trying to build all kinds of services for their customers. And even though Wise has been growing a lot, they were very focused on currency exchanges. And only in the recent couple of years, they started adding more services around business banking and stuff like that. In the terms of founders is one group, and CEOs of these more developed, larger organizations is a very different group, very different set of needs. If we start with founders, I think it's key for them to focus on something for them to be able to compete, because otherwise your user is going to have to find a very good reason to use your service instead of using one of the big guys. So you need to solve a very precise problem in a very good way for it to make sense. And those sort of like niches, I don't like to think in terms of like the opportunities are running out, because they never are, but there's less and less space for like the basic stuff, because the big guys are doing all of that. So like basic banking, like everyone is doing it. Like there's so many neobanks right now that it would be really hard to compete by just coming up with a new neobank. You would have to have a very, very enticing value proposition for that to work. So that's what I would do with startups, really focusing on what is the value that you're going to bring and why you and not one of the other established companies. And then for the bigger guys, some companies working like big companies, they work in as a series of startups. So they split up and every little team is like a little startup, and that allows them to stay nimble and to like move faster. So that is an approach that I think is very useful. And most likely, if you're going to work with a big company, that's probably the situation that you're going to see. You're going to be working with a very specific department or team or part of the product, as opposed to like redesigning the entire interface, because the entire interface or the entire product is going to be dependent on many, many groups of people. And it's very unlikely that they're going to hire an agency to do that. I don't know, I might be wrong, but that's sort of like what I've seen. So yeah, for those two groups, the approach is very different. For one is like very focused on what is the message. And for the other one is focused on like the one thing that you want to improve out of all of these portfolio of services.
That's helpful. Thanks.
So I do have one question, Ed. So what was your biggest challenge while designing for fintech?
Understanding flows, understanding how things work. So like I mentioned before, it's really valuable for a designer to understand what's happening under the hood. So not only what the user sees in the front end, but also what's happening in the back end, like how are things being processed, how long things are taken, what are the different parties involved. For this, I find extremely valuable to think in terms of like the business blueprint or the service blueprint, in which you see all of the layers of the process. It's always challenging to try to understand these processes because they involve a lot of different parties to make things happen. The way sort of like we've tackled that is by mapping out the entire experience and try to understand in terms of like flow charts and just diagrams what's going on, and break things down into like very simple terms of very basic units of logic. So that once you understand it at that level, then you can start finding points for optimization or things that you can improve at the interface level. Yeah. So for me, that's the number one challenge, is like understanding. And sometimes understanding is not just understanding in terms of like what's happening in the flow, but also like what are the requirements for each one of the steps in the flow. Have you guys seen the presentation software?
Yeah.
It's so good. Well, actually, the guy that founded is the founder of Evernote, and I saw a video of him recently explaining how he sees his businesses. There's a tool that engineers use called state machines, which is a really, really helpful way to understand. Yeah, right. It's so good because it's very logical and it allows you to like really distill the process into like what's really going on. The concept is super simple. You can understand state machines in the first 5 minutes of or 10 minutes of being exposed to the concept. But once you have it, it's game changing. It's like such a powerful tool for you to understand processes. So state machines is basically how engineers think. So you have sort of like this nodes, or like you have an object and that object has an input and an output. And that object runs a process that alters the input to make it into an output. So let's say if you think about a car wash, the car wash would be like that object. So there's the car, the dirty car comes in, there's a process that happens in the car wash, and then the car comes out clean. So it's called state machine because the state of the car before coming into the element or the object is dirty. And then through some transformation, it comes out clean. So there's a state change. And that allows you to like understand basically everything, every single process that happens in terms of like, okay, how is information flowing and getting transformed throughout the entire process?
Hey, Ed, that's a model that we used, but we call it the chicken pot pie model.
Yeah.
And it was a way that you have a chicken, you put it through a process at the end, you should have a good tasting pie, right? So I had not heard it called the steak model, but I bet you that's what it was, where we took it from. That's interesting. Thanks for sharing.
So that was a very long answer to your question, Raquel, but yeah,
Thank you.
The most challenging part is understanding processes. And these are sort of like my current tools of handling that challenge.
All right. I think that was the last question. Ed, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. All right. Have a great night. I know it's night over there for a couple of you guys. And for the rest of you, have a great rest of your day.